All right, right now, let's take a look at Eagles practice from Thursday. The latest on all the things that are happening. Jimmy Kempski, he joins us from PhillyVoice.com with his weekly look at the Philadelphia Eagles on the Thursday here on the Sports Bash. Jimmy, how you doing, pal?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Always good. Obviously, a lot of injuries with this team, man. It seems like there's a laundry list of guys. Let's kind of check them off here. Sounds like Jason Peters going to play on Sunday. I mean, is that the feeling that we're getting right now?
We'll see. He got hurt late in the game against the Jets, and it was a quad injury. And obviously, as we saw against the Redskins, he tried to make a go of it, and he felt that during the game that he would be hurting his team by staying in the game and not playing as well as he could be had he not been hurt. So he took himself out, and we saw Matt Tobin go the rest of the way. Now, I don't know what the difference is between, how he felt this time last week heading into the Redskins game and how he feels, now heading into this week against the Saints. But, certainly he tried to go last week, couldn't do it. So I don't know. Well, maybe he will play, and I think maybe the question is, can he play throughout the entire game, even if he does play? But, clearly I don't think he's 100%.
Yeah, it seems that over the last, half a year or so that there's been at least a series or so that he has exited in a game and then kind of comes back. But, that's the first time he's really missed an extended part of the game. We talked a little bit about this in the preseason, but he's 33 years old, Jimmy. I mean, are you seeing a declining Jason Peters even when he's healthy?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think he's the, same super dominant left tackle among top 3, top 5. Yeah, I don't know. He's still very good. He's still clearly, I think, in my opinion, clearly a very good player. You wonder how much the continuity of that offensive line has affected his play this season. Really, just how the perception of the way he's played. I wonder how much that perception is just an effect of the O-line in general just playing horribly through the first 4 games of this season. But, nobody beats Father Time. And he is, I think, the 3rd oldest starting offensive lineman in the NFL. I know Mathis was 1, and then Andrew Whitworth of the Bengals was right behind him at 2. I think Peters might be 3. He's getting up there in age, and at some point, everybody's body falls apart, especially in the NFL, and that is a taxing position in the NFL. You don't really see many guys play, past 33, 34 years old anywhere along the offensive line, except for center, which those guys seem to have more longevity than the rest of them. But yeah, at some point, everyone's going to wear down, and maybe we're seeing that a little bit with Peters.
On the right side, Lane Johnson, I guess he's the fill-in in case Peters can't go on the left side. But, after watching the video of him after the game, he looked like a guy who you were surprised he even made it through the game on Sunday. He was leaning up against the wall after the game. Does he look like a guy who's anywhere near ready to play an NFL football game?
Well, he's a tough guy. And he said, we don't have much else. So he's going to try to make it go, and he's got an assortment of injuries. Lane Johnson does, so it's not just one for him. But yeah, he said he's going to play, and I would imagine they'll let him if he wants to play. Because again, like Lane Johnson, they don't have much else. What are they going to do? So he's got to play. And you look at that offensive line, and I think it was a pretty obvious thing heading into the season that they lack depth. And I think they'd love to be able to have a guy that they can trust to put in there for Lane Johnson and or Jason Peters. Obviously, nobody has that kind of depth where you're going to replace 2 tackles in one game. But, depth was, I think, a clear concern along the O-line heading into the season. And then, we've been through it all with the 2 new guards. And, was it a good move, releasing the 2 guards that you already had? And, on down the line. So, certainly his injury and Jason Peters' injury, if they're missing either of those 2 guys, then it is a huge loss because they don't have anything to put behind them.
Well, last week they had 7 offensive line active. I mean, do they have an 8th? Do they have a 9th? I mean, is it to the point where they're going to have to maybe have more guys on game day, not only for injury, but just because of poor play?
Well, they had Vandervelde. Vandervelde was inactive last week, so he could potentially be active this week if somebody isn't. But that's been their MO is to dress 7 guys for every game. But I would imagine heading into this week that with Peters banged up and Lane Johnson banged up, the likelihood that either one of those guys isn't going to make it through the entire game has to be higher. Clearly, obviously, Jason Peters didn't make it through the game last week, so I would imagine that they may opt to keep 8 guys active.
All right, Jimmy Kempski's with us, PhillyVoice.com. Byron Maxwell's another one now. It seemed like, early in the week he says he can't run. He's slowing down as hard. I mean, it seemed like this guy was far from being able to play. Is he a guy that's been out there running around at practice the last couple days?
He said he's going to play. And again, we'll see.
It's admirable.
I think every player, thinks they can play. When it's Thursday, they go, okay, well, it's still 3 days away. I can play. But yeah, he said he's going to play. So I would tend to believe him there. I do think the Eagles have okay depth at cornerback. I think while Rowe had the big pass interference call late in that game, I thought that was certainly a callable pass interference call there, but wasn't egregious by any stretch. And I think the personal foul that he got when he pushed the receiver, Garcon, I think Garcon flopped a little bit on that one, which hats off to him. He got the call, so
right.
If you're not cheating, you're not trying. So I think he got a tough call in there, and obviously they attacked him. He gave up a lot of short underneath stuff in that game. He didn't give up anything big, of course, except for the pass interference call. So I do think that he played well enough, and Carroll's been really good on the other side opposite Maxwell, but obviously they want Maxwell in there, and that's why they paid a lot of money so that he could sort of be their number one corner, which he had. But at least with the Saints, you're not facing a guy like Julio Jones, where their receiving core really isn't what it used to be, and but if Maxwell says he's going to play, I would be inclined to believe him. But again, we'll see.
Well, and the funny part is, we talked about this on Tuesday's show a little bit about him. I was not the biggest proponent of that signing. I think the amount of money they gave him is absurd. I understand it. Then, of course, you go see Kerry Williams play Monday night. The guy looks like he's a shutdown all-pro. It kind of goes to, the scheme that they're running, that Maxwell looks very capable in Seattle, comes here, looks shaky. Williams goes from here to there, looks great. Obviously, my point is, Did you notice that Maxwell was not on the field? That was kind of my question. I didn't even notice he wasn't out. I knew he was hurt, but did you really notice anything different because he wasn't there?
Well, I did, from my perspective, only because, and maybe I wouldn't have if I were home watching it. But when you're in the press box, they announce
exactly.
So they say they'll say Byron Maxwell, whatever. They'll say the player's name, they'll say the player's injury, and they'll say whether they, questionable to return or he's going to be out for the rest of the game or whatever. So they made the announcement. I knew he was missing, but I hadn't heard that I hadn't heard that perspective that he didn't know that he was missing. But I can see that.
Well, right. I mean, I knew he was out because when they announced it to you guys, I saw all 15 tweets right after each other saying that he's not going to return to the game. I got that. But my point was, it wasn't like as a fan watching the game, I'm saying, man, this team's really struggling without Maxwell on the field. I didn't really notice that he wasn't there. I mean, I knew he was hurt, but my point was, whoever was filling in for him, it didn't seem like there was that big of a drop-off.
Right. Well, he's had a rough go of it in the early part of the season here. Week one, he was roasted. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. And then week two, I thought he was better, but he gave up that garbage time touchdown to Terrence Williams on the quick slant. It looked bad. I mean, he did look like there wasn't a lot of effort there. And like you said earlier, he said he was tired at the end of that game. I don't blame him because they've been playing a crazy number of snaps so far. In every game they faced 70 or more snaps. I thought he was better in week three. Brandon Marshall had a ton of catches, but they certainly weren't all at Byron Maxwell. and then week 4 he barely played. But I think he's been getting better as the season's gone along. But that week 1 game against Atlanta, I think that's the one that's really standing out in everyone's head.
Sure. Jimmy Kempski's with us, PhillyVoice.com, covers the Philadelphia Eagles. You wrote a piece, Jimmy, that the running game isn't really the play caller chip, it's the GM chip. And I was asking this question the other day to our listeners, is the skill position players they have, are they good enough to run the offense? In other words, is it coming down to that this line is just incapable, but they have good enough talent at the skill position players if the line blocks?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the line hasn't done anything to help the skill position players. Although, the offensive line actually has pass protected pretty well this season. In Washington, I thought that was the one game where they did struggle. But the first 3 weeks of the season, I thought they actually pass protected really well. I mean, Sam Bradford has had all kinds of clean pockets to throw from, and from my perspective, he's just been flat out inaccurate. I mean, he's just missing throws that he should make, and it's been like 6, 7, 8 per game that he's like where he just has an open receiver, got a clean pocket to throw from, and he's just missing. And that's not obviously what we saw from him in the preseason. Specifically that third preseason game against the Packers, where it was 10 for 10, not just 10 for 10, but everything through was exactly where it had to be. But certainly he hasn't been anywhere close to as accurate in the games that actually matter. And then the receivers, they all have a bunch of drops. Jordan Matthews has a bunch of drops. The tight ends have had drops. The running backs, especially Ryan Matthews, have had drops. So, I mean, while he's been inaccurate when the throws have been on the money, the receivers are dropping them. And then you have some borderline throws there, too, where, you can't blame the receiver for not making the play, but you hope that they'd make some of those plays for a struggling quarterback. So they're not really helping him in terms of bailing him out on some, borderline throws, and they've dropped the throws that were on the money. So I think it's certainly worth asking, would the skill position players be, good enough even if the offensive line were playing better? I think there's certainly some concern there as well.
Jimmy, give me your thoughts on Billick's comments. Obviously, when you talked about this, I think a week ago, said you don't get any indication that Kelly would want to go back to college, that he likes it here, and then Billick basically saying that you can't treat these guys like this, and it sounds like this thing's going to blow up. Do you get the sense that there is starting to be some dissension in the locker room?
Well, Billick cited talking to the players when he's done Philly's games. He hasn't done any of Philly's games yet this season. So I wonder if the people that he talked to were, players that were on the team last year but are gone now. I mean, certainly Gary Williams made it pretty clear that he didn't like the way that the Eagles did certain things. He didn't like the way they didn't like the way that Chip Kelly runs his practices, where they really tired out by the end of the season. And then, of course, some other guys that have left the team, have spoken out about how they didn't like what Chip Kelly's done. So it's not really, total news to the public. But, what Brian Billick said was that it was a quote-unquote powder keg ready to blow up, that the players are treated like college players. And he said that, when you have 10-6 seasons, you don't really hear players popping off about that kind of thing. But when it starts to really go down, and at 1-3, they're on the path to a bad season. Although certainly it's not the kind of thing where they can't turn it around, but they're on the way to a season that's not looking good so far. That's when you start to see players who are unhappy with the way things are going in the locker room or on the practice field or wherever. That's where you start to see the quote unquote anonymous quotes coming in from players. And that's when the locker room begins to crumble a little bit. So that's basically what Billick was saying. But I do wonder if he was basing those opinions of players on guys that are no longer with the team.
Yeah, and I guess it's not ridiculous to assume that in years past, when you have a unit that's outperforming the other, and the other side feels like they're not holding up their end of the bargain, or the other side saying, hey, we're doing our job, where are you? I guess that's when you start to wonder if the two sides start to say, hey, when are you going to pick up your end of the bargain? I guess obviously mentioning the defense, looking at the offense.
Yeah, I wonder how those locker rooms were back in, the Buddy Ryan days. When the defense was amazing and the offense was, couldn't get out of their own way. But it's been the other way in recent years. The Eagles' offense was the dominant side of the ball, and then the Eagles' defense was kind of the side that was letting them down a little bit. Certainly that was the case in 2013. I actually thought the defense played a little bit better than the offense last year, and clearly the defense is playing far better than the offense is. It's funny how the Eagles have never put all three phases of the game together at the same time. Like, you could take the Eagles' 2013 offense, their 2014 special teams, and their 2015 defense. They don't really have something there, but unfortunately it never lines up that way.
No doubt, and we know this team, Jimmy, started 1-3 a couple of years ago. They started ripping games off. Any parallels that you see from this team to that team, or is this not a similar situation?
From this team to what team now?
The 1-3 start that he had 2 years ago.
Oh, okay, right. The first year. I think that year it was expected that they started, because they're coming off a season where they were 4-12. It's a new coach. It's a new offense. They switched from a 4-3 to a 3-4. So I don't think, and they had 4-3 personnel trying to play in a 3-4, and nobody expected that to be an immediate transition. But what we're seeing on the offensive side of the ball is just nobody making plays. Like, nobody's blocking anyone. They can't throw. They can't catch. I don't think we saw that in 2013. I mean, that team did make plays, whereas this team is just clearly not. I mean, obviously the defense is playing far better than that defense did, but this offense, even with that 1-3 start, isn't as good as that offense was the first 4 games of that season.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And, of course, that first night against Washington, they looked like they were going to be the most unstoppable thing you ever saw. The second half of that game, though, Jimmy, they kind of tailed off a little bit. They didn't look nearly as good in the second half of that game. But then after that, they lost 3 games in a row, even after they had played that well on that Monday night. But their defense was a wreck that year.
Yeah, defense was definitely a wreck that year. And certain phases of the defense were a wreck last year, too. I mean, last year, they were really good stopping the run, and they had a lot of sacks, although they also had a lot of snaps to get those sacks. So, but I mean, the big thing that they did last year was they gave up just an absurd number of big plays. They gave up the third most pass plays of 20-plus yards in NFL history, and you're not going to win many games. Actually, they were very fortunate to win 10 games last year, giving up this huge number of big plays.
Jimmy Kempski's with us, phillyvoice.com, and you can follow him at Jimmy Kempski on Twitter, where obviously the Eagles 1-3 against the Saints, and the Saints coming into town. Last time they were here, they won that playoff game. And what do you think of this Saints team? They beat Dallas the other night. Have they turned the corner a little bit?
Yeah, I hadn't really dug in on them. Yeah, that was the first game of theirs that I saw this year, and I only saw the second half of that game against Dallas. But the one thing that stands out to me with that team is in 2012, they gave up over 7,000 yards of offense over the season, which is the worst defensive season yardage-wise in the history of the NFL. It was only 3 years ago. This year, and it was 440 yards per game. So this year they're giving up like 390 yards per game, somewhere in that ballpark, which of course which is bad, but it's not historically bad like they were 3 years ago. However, that year that they had that historically bad defense, they were giving up 6.5 yards per play, which is awful. And that's exactly what they're giving up right now this year. So this year they're giving up 6.5 yards per play, which is the same yards per play that they gave up in that historically bad season. So this is not a good defense. And if there is a chance for Chip Kelly's offense to get going, I mean, I thought last week there was a chance for their offense to get going against what was a completely depleted Redskins secondary. But, this is another chance for them against another bad defense. Well, actually, the Redskins are the number 2 defense in the NFL, so I shouldn't be lumping them in with bad defenses. But the Saints have certainly a bad defense, and if there's a chance for the Eagles to get going, this is the week to do it.
Yeah, and they give up 123 yards a game on the ground. If you can't run the ball this week, you might fold the 10 on that one this year, and we'll see how they do and who comes out. If it's Murray or Matthews or a split or what they bring to the table, it's going to be very interesting to see the adjustments they've made after really struggling to run the ball. He's Jimmy Kempski, everybody. Thursdays you can hear him on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, bud.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, Jimmy Kempski, phillyvoice.com, at Jimmy Kempski on Twitter. Always good to catch up with Jimmy.